Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed my tutorial, my playthrough videos for Tragedy Looper. Now Tragedy Looper is a gameplay mechanic and a thing that I don't think there are nearly enough games on this style or this kind of game. We have a couple million different games about trading in the Mediterranean. We have a couple thousand different zombie games, but the hidden deduction, the hidden movement, the secretive kind of game, there's just not a lot of games that are like this. You basically have what? Fury of Dracula, where person is playing Dracula and the other heroes are trying to deduce, trying to track down and trying to capture the evil vampire and destroy him before he can basically destroy all of Europe. And you also have a couple dozen different versions of Jack the Ripper. You have Letters from Whitechapel, you have a couple other games, but the basic idea of where one person's playing a bad guy and has all the cards and know everything that's going on versus a group of other players who are trying to deduce and trying to get in that person's head, trying to logically outsmart them and get to the bottom of what's going on. There just are not a lot of games that fit that theme. Heck, you would have thought there would have been a Cthulhu game by now that fits that theme. Where's a game where one person is playing the cultist, they're trying to bring about the end of the world by waking up an old one, while the rest of the heroes are investigators trying to stop them. I mean, that seems like a theme that's just ripe for stealing right there. And if you steal, at least give me credit, at least do something along those lines. But it seems really interesting and odd that this is a gameplay mechanic and a theme that isn't done that much. And it's something I really like about Tragedy Looper. It's a game mechanic that I don't see much of. It's a game mechanic I really, really enjoy. And Tragedy Looper is a game that's done it very, very well. I also like how the game is actually pretty darn easy to figure out how to play. Now, I'm saying that mechanically. It's never very easy to deduce what your opponents are trying to do. But mechanically, this game is not very hard to figure out. Now, while the rules break down the turns into very, very minute details, that's basically done just to try to resolve timing conflicts, which can occur between the use of powers, between the use of intrigue and the way things go off. But the game is very, very simple. It's basically me as the mastermind. I'm going to play down 3 cards. Every one of you gets to play down 1 card apiece. We're going to go ahead and resolve. And if I win, I'm going to cackle maniacally. If you guys win, I'm going to say, darn it, and I'm going to try to win the next day. And then basically, the game moves on from that point. Everything else is just resolving small, minor details. And that is kind of one thing I do want to comment on right here and right now before I go any further into this review. This is one of those games that requires, I'm going to emphasize that point, the mastermind player to understand the nuts and bolts of this game extremely well. This is one of those games that, unlike other games where you have one player versus many, where it's the one player, the mastermind, the dungeon master, the overlord, whatever the term the board game wants to use, they can make a couple mistakes in some of those other games and most of them will slide by, go under the rug, and it's really not a big deal. This is not a game where that can happen. This is a game where it's highly, highly important for the mastermind to understand the nuts and the bolts of this game to the point that if they make one simple mistake, forget one simple thing like a forbidden intrigue, like a mandatory goodwill refusal, or they forget one of the abilities or the misread ability or make any minor mistakes, the whole scenario can be blown and you might as well just reset the entire board. And that's one important point I want to make before we go on any further in this review. This game is very, very reliant on a mastermind who understands each scenario very well, understands the roles that are involved in the scenario, understands everything that's going on very, very well to the point where they can basically play the game without the rule books, without the player aids, where you can just basically sit back, arms crossed, smile at your opponents and laugh at them because you understand what's going on because you got it all going on in your head. And this is one of those games that requires that to be really, really good and create a really good experience and make it enjoyable for all the protagonists. Now, I'm not trying to intimidate people, but I just want people to understand that this is one of those qualities of this game that a bad mastermind can make this a terrible, terrible gaming experience. I like to kind of make this similar to an RPG or a role-playing game where if you got a terrible dungeon master who doesn't understand the nuts and bolts of the game, doesn't understand the adventure, doesn't understand the scenario, the players are going to get bored, they're going to fall asleep, and they're not going to feel engaged in the game anymore. This game can be quite like that, and this is a game that you want to play. I suggest, and matter of fact, the rule book even suggests that you find the person who has lots of experience with role-playing games or similar to take over the role of the mastermind so the rest of the players can enjoy the game and have a grand experience. Now again, the rules are not complex. The mastermind's role can be complex, and I want to emphasize that because the game does have 2 rule books. Each one of these rule books is about 40 pages, which can be kind of intimidating. You're looking at the game going, wow, this game has 80 pages worth of rules. Well, no, not really. The rules are actually printed twice in the Player's Handbook and in the Masterminds Handbook. And the Masterminds Handbook actually goes into great detail telling you how to play the role of the mastermind. It actually walks you through the very first scenario of the game, telling you how to play the scenario, how to work with the players, how to make it an enjoyable scenario, and let you know exactly what your goals are. And it even includes more scenarios for the mastermind to play through, giving you more hints, more tools, and more instructions on how to run these scenarios very efficiently and make them fun for the other players. Just understand that as the mastermind, you're going to have a little bit more of a challenging job than the players, but if you're willing to take on that little bit of extra work, you're looking for a fantastic gaming experience. Now, while I do enjoy Tragedy Looper quite a bit, and I think the gameplay mechanics are pretty darn awesome, and I think this is probably one of my top, well, I hate to say it's one of my top 2 hit and roll deduction games because it's basically competing with one other game, Fury of Dracula, which is my other favorite game, and would probably have a tough time deciding between Tragedy Looper and deciding between Fury of Dracula, just because I really love the theme of Fury of Dracula, but I love the gameplay of Tragedy Looper better, so take that for what it's worth. But I do have one minor quibble about Tragedy Looper, and that's going to be the components for the game. It kind of feels like Z-Man Games, when they published this game in America, and I know this is going to sound kind of backhanded, and I don't mean this to be backhanded, but it does kind of feel like they didn't have a lot of faith in the IP or in the gameplay, because the components, they kind of feel a little bit of a throwaway here. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a lack of player aids in the game. There's a lack of materials for you to make your own scenario. There's a lack of just what you feel should be in a complete package for this game. Now, granted, you can go over to Z-Man's website and you can download player aids. You can download scenario aids to help you make your own scenarios. But in my mind, those things should have been in the box right from the beginning. And as a matter of fact, those player aids aren't even made by Z-Man Games. They're made by somebody who's a user on Board Game Geek who made these fantastic player aids. And I forgot the guy's name. I apologize, but go to Z-Man's website and download those player aids. They're absolutely awesome. This person did a great job with those, especially if you want to create your own scenarios. Go check those out. But in my mind, those should have been things right in the box right from the beginning. Another thing I want to comment on is you'll notice that all my cards for this game are sleeved, and I left them sleeved even through the playthrough. And normally I don't like to do that because I know there can occasionally be glare on cards when you do that, but it's kind of mandatory to do that for one important reason. For some reason, they decided to make black backs for all the cards in this game. And that's a terrible idea because black cards have a tendency to pick up the smallest, most minute nick of any kind. And as a matter of fact, one of my Mastermind card is actually marked a little bit. I had to take a little black marker and cover the mark a little bit before I sleeve the cards. And that's very important because this is one of those games where you cannot know what the other players are playing card-wise. Otherwise, it ruins the game. The protagonist should never know what cards the mastermind is playing, and the mastermind should never know what cards the protagonist is playing, because that's 90% of the game there. It's the mind game between the two players. And cards with a black back, easily marked, easily damaged, easily nicked. This is one of those games where as soon as you get home, open up the box, put all these cards in the sleeve immediately. You'll thank me later. And this is coming from somebody who does not sleeve games at all. I own lots of card games. None of them are sleeved except for one of them, and that's Thunderstone, because I have the original game and I don't want to go buy the new set. So I went through and sleeved Thunderstone, but sleeve Tragedy Looper. You'll save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of aggravation in the long run. Also, go check out those player aids done by that player on Z-Man's website. Download them, especially if you want to start making your own scenarios, because none of that is included in the box. Also, one other thing that I did personally that you may want to do yourself is I went through and I took these little player sheets right here that tells you the scenario situations, and I laminated one for the basic tragedy and I laminated one for the first steps. And I include in my box for the players, when they play the game, I have an erasable marker, and I hand this to the players for them to use as a player aid to help them start deducing when they play the game. Again, it's another thing I thought should have been in the box, wasn't included, and it's another one of the reasons why I feel like Z-Man didn't put forth the 100% effort they could have when they put out this game. And I'm hoping future printings, future editions, and maybe the future expansion coming out for this game pretty soon starts including all those extra things that really should have been included to make a fantastic game even better. Every time I do a review for a board game, there's one thing I like to examine in every one of my reviews, and if I think it's relevant, I always toss it out there just to let you guys know what I think. And that's always going to be player count and just how family friendly I think a game is. Some games just may not appear family friendly, like they may appear to be too complex on the surface, but sometimes those games can be great for families, and sometimes games list player counts that aren't always optimal. So whenever there's a little bit of conflict in those kind of situations, I like to take a few minutes and comment on those, just so you understand what you're getting into when you bring this game home if you have a certain size play group and you want to enjoy this game with that player count. Now, Tragedy Looper does list as a game for 2 to 4 players, and it is a team-based game, so on the surface, you'd almost think it'd be a shoe-in fit for any one of those player counts. But unfortunately, it's not. This is one of those games that's going to play best with 4 players, where one player plays the mastermind and the other players each take on the role of one of the protagonists. Now, the game can also be played with 2 players pretty darn efficiently, with one player playing the mastermind and the other player taking on the role of all 3 protagonists. The unfortunate thing that happens, though, when you go from a 4-player game to a 2-player game, though, is the game gets easier for the protagonist and more difficult for the mastermind. And the reason why this happens is because of the table talk rule. The table talk rule states that once a loop is started, the players are not allowed to discuss with each other exactly what they're doing and what plans they have when they visit these various NPCs and locations, and that gives the mastermind another way to bluff and force them to start wasting their intrigue cards there. Well, unfortunately, if you're one player controlling all 3 masterminds, the chance of you playing 2 forbidden intrigues is 0 and none, because you're just not going to be dumb enough to do it, because you know exactly what cards you're playing at which locations. You're not going to forget, oh, did I play forbidden intrigue? Oh, wait, did I play another one? It's not going to happen, so you don't have to worry about that. But it is a very real chance of that happening in the 4-player game when all 3 of our protagonists don't know exactly what the other 2 protagonists are playing, and that's a mind game the mastermind gets to play. So when you drop down to 2 players, that's one tool, one trick the mastermind loses, and one advantage the protagonists gain. Finally, in the 3-player game, this game is balanced for exactly 3 protagonists and for 1 mastermind. So when you have a 2-player game, you're basically forced for 1 player to be a mastermind, and then the other 2 players have to basically start sharing the other 3 protagonists. Now, whether that's 1 player plays 1, whoever the leader is, gets 1, and the other player gets to be 2 as their saving grace for not being the leader, or whatever you choose, that does mean that, again, we start working towards that 2-player problem where less players means more knowledge and less chances for missteps to happen. So that's why I want to make this point really quick, that I think Tragedy Looper at its core is meant to be a 4-player game. It's still good as a 2-player game, but I probably would play it a few times if your play group is always going to be 3 players. Great 4, still good 2, not as best with 3 players. And when it comes to family friendliness, thematically, there's nothing too dark about this game. Imagery wise, I mean, the theme can be a little bit dark. You're dealing with murder, you're dealing with serial killers, you're dealing with death, and all these different kind of tragedies that can happen. So theme wise, the theme is probably not good for the younger players. Difficulty of the game is probably not good for the younger players, and just the challenge and the mind games that occur when you're playing this game. This is definitely one of those games, thematically, brain power, and everything goes along with it, definitely meant for ages 13 and up. The bottom line here is that Tragedy Looper is a game in a style of game mechanics that doesn't have a lot of competition, but that's okay here because Tragedy Looper is done extremely well. It's a fantastic game where you're trying to get into the minds of your opponents, trying to outsmart, outdeduce, and out-trick your opponents and try to figure out what's going on here for the protagonists and try to keep all the secrets hidden if you're the mastermind. The game is done very well. The mechanics are pretty easy. A little bit of fiddliness here and there, but most of it can be solved with the timing issues. There's also a little bit of issue with the components. Not the best that they could have been. I think they could have been better. And also one point I didn't mention earlier, this is definitely one of those games where you want to have the same play group playing it every single week, because it'll get kind of boring after a while if this is the game you're going to take to a meetup, where you're basically playing the same training scenario over and over week after week as you're rotating in new players. If you can keep the same playing group, if you can keep the same group of 4 players and keep enjoying this game and you enjoy writing scenarios, this is one of those games that'll stay on your shelf for a long, long time. I hope you enjoyed this full video series for Tragedy Looper the game. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them in the YouTube comments down below. As always, please subscribe, and if you want to, you feel free to email me with any other comments or questions you might have at Off the Shelf Board Game Reviews. That's OTSBGR at gmail.com. Thanks for watching.